I want to talk about the translation studies and its importance because I was told that not everybody here is a student of translation studies, and I thought that maybe it's good to have an introduction to this discipline. And I will try to be as clear as possible. If anything is not clear, please raise your hand, stop me, ask, and I will try to explain better, okay? So I'm going to touch 2 points. The first one is to define the object of study, that is, what is translation? We're talking about translation, but what is translation? And the second one is the shaping of the discipline, how this discipline was constructed in time and, with different methods. Of course, we don't have much time. I have a lot of slides. The slides will be made available to you later on, because I'm sure that there are misprints and problems that I will try to put in order before sharing them. But of course, I'm not going to read all the slides, but I have tried to make the slides very didactic, so that if you go through them again on your own, you will find references or something like that. Even if I'm just maybe quickly talking about that, I will not explain each and everything, okay? But it's just, for your future reference. Before we start, I want to show you a small video, and please think about what this has to do with translation.
Io ricordo che all'università ho studiato su testi in fotocopia, non erano neanche in istruzione, era proprio anche semplicemente la storia degli arabi, mischiando le carte, cioè facendo rientrare un discorso sociale e politico dentro un discorso religioso, per cui etichettando tutto come Islam e come Islam indiscriminatamente parlando di Islam come fede, di Islam come religione, di Islam come politica, di Islam come cultura, di Islam come civiltà e
ad accogliere l'altro. E quindi semmai altererò anche delle mie consuetudini, delle
roti. So, now I would like you to go to this site, Menti.com, or you can use the QR code and enter the code that you will see there. If you use the QR code, this is not necessary. And I think you have like 1 minute to write 3 words. Now I have to get out of this in order to open the here. Wait a minute. It's somewhere here. It was here. Now it's not there any longer, of course. Menti. So you please go to this website. Okay. So Can you see the QR code? Could you now just if you enter your replies, we could see your replies immediately on the screen, apparently, if it works. So yes, sure. It's here. Just a minute. Can you see it? Or maybe you can just enter the code. It's 41344363. And you can write 1 to 3 words that are related. What is translation for you? Or what does bread have to do with translation? I mean, why do you think that I'm showing you these things? If you want to take a picture, maybe I can go back to the website. Okay, so we are starting to have the replies, and this is very nice. Can you see them? Oh, that's great. Great, I like it. Okay, let's wait, I think, 1 minute or something, and then we can stop and see what you think that culture is. That culture, you see, culture is a big word, so I'm using that translation is. I'm not submitting my words, of course, because wow, getting interesting. Wow, I see that culture. Oh, sorry, I should not move from here. Sorry, this is bad because I'm not used to sit down, and be like that. I'm used to do. Maybe I can. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I don't know, but it's big. You have food and culture are the most important words that you selected, and now it's changing from time. Wow, very quickly. So we have flavor, recipe, need, chapati, and then there are the small ones I cannot read. Our daily life. This is interesting. Not so costly. What is this? I cannot put it here. Okay. I'm not sure. Oh, okay. But then I have to if I go there, I have to. Yeah, but I can't see from here. It's too small. So I
can just control plus.
I don't think so. It gets smaller. No. I think it's fine. Okay. So we should take this out, but I don't know how to do it.
Just do zoom from here.
I don't think so.
With 2 fingers, you try.
No, it is not. It is not a touch. Anyway, no problem.
Like
oh, okay. Like this.
Yeah, and then wherever you want to zoom,
okay.
Just click on this one.
But I don't. Okay, I think we can just start from this because I don't want to use the whole time for this. But I just wanted to start with some ideas of what is translation, because we have to define translation. And why did I choose this documentary? Wow, it's changing again. Somebody because it's a documentary. You probably heard something in Italian that you did not understand, but it's a documentary that was made with a series of interviews to Italian translators from different languages. And I really like the idea that they made this parallel between bread making and translating. I don't know, you put a lot of things like different recipes, cultural transfer, knowing each other, making like flavorful. I like this very much. Breaking language barrier, practice truth, habit of cooking, woman to man. Well, this is interesting. I don't know how it comes from the bread, but maybe because there were both men and women doing it. and cultural transliteration, idea of living, and then paratha, signifier, and so on and so forth. Ingredients, dedication. This is all connected to something that, as somebody suggested, you do every day. I mean, of course, if somebody of you is from an area where they eat more rice than roti, probably they will disagree. But I have to position myself, and I come from a place where a daily thing is bread, like roti. I added the roti banana because I thought this is something. But if I translate roti like both bread, pane, pão, I mean, is this the same thing? You probably saw that behind the word, how we call these things, there are different techniques, different tools that are used. And it's always the same thing, but it's always a different thing. So when we talk about translation, we are, of course, talking about, like somebody was saying, transferring from one language to the other. Yes, of course, it's something like that. But there is also meaning, but there is also craft. And for us, and I'm talking about, people who translate, craft is really like, these people, they wake up every day and they bake the bread and they, make the dough and everything. And they have their own technique, their own tools. But then if you see at a certain time, we also hear some sounds and there is a rhythm. There was one of them who was like, when you make the bread in the Portuguese way, they were making it like ta 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 ta. So there is rhythm in translation, which is what we do when we type, but also what we do when we think about the sound that we have to recreate in our language or in the language where we are translating. So translation is all this, and it's really complicated. So I don't think I will give answers to the question, what is translation? But, and I don't think there is only one answer. We are going to see different ideas related to this notion of translating. And thank you for participating to this survey. I think I just want to show you, if anybody is interested also, I want to show you the documentary. You can see the YouTube link if you want to see it. It's in Italian with subtitles in Spanish, so it's really a challenge. But I mean, maybe if anybody wants to see it, or if you can understand either Italian or Spanish. And this is the list of the translators that were interviewed. Anyway, if we want to define translation, we can go to the dictionary, and the dictionary says that, of course, it's something. But if we go to the notion of translation from the etymological point of view, we can see that the main meaning is from Latin, and it's like carrying over, to transfer. Transfer is like transferre means to carry across, to carry beyond. And tomorrow we will see that maybe there are also other ideas of translation if we think using, like, for example, Hindi or some Indian languages. But today I'm going to stay on the translation studies. So it's a transfer that can be literal or can be like a figure, like a metaphor. And think of the word metamorphosis. Maybe you know it. It means changing the shape. And tomorrow we are also going to mention Rupantar. So you can see that maybe, because very often I hear that, oh, but we have a different idea, it's totally different. Because, there is this divide, East and West. We have to divide it. Okay, let's discuss it. Of course, transfer is to take over, and anuvad is another thing. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But I mean, there is also metamorphosis that come from the same root. So the definition from the dictionary is that, I mean, it's very wide, and there are many different ideas, you know, and there are many distinctions. I am putting you this reference, which is one of the most exhaustive books about translation studies. So the definitions, of course, have changed over time, and there are normative, prescriptive ideas of translation. There are other ideas of translation. We are going to address them. When we think of normative idea of translation, we think something that gives you the rules of how to translate. And so at a certain historical moment, in a certain place, somebody says that a language has this and this and this rule, and so you are supposed to translate using the rules of this language, which may be different from the ones that people use when they talk. I was talking now about the difficulty of translating spoken Tamil into French, for example. Because if it's spoken Tamil, it's not written Tamil, it's a different register, it's so different that how can you recreate this thing in a language that doesn't have this diglottic diglossia. So we can also talk about a descriptive approach, and of course, if we describe, we are not giving norms, we are not giving rules, we are just trying to see what is there. And so we want to see the linguistic phenomena in the time or throughout time, you know, but we are not saying this is right, this is wrong, while when we create norms, of course, we are. So, another definition of translation is that it is an interlinguistic transfer procedure that, of course, requires interpretation. So it's the meaning of the sense of the source text, the production of the production of the target text, and we have, as you can see, many different things that enter into the process. There is the communication parameters that are imposed on the translator, and oh, I'm sorry, you see here we have brackets, but they should be inverted commas. I don't know why. I will correct it. That's why I didn't want to give you this. I knew that there were some typos. So and so the translator has linguistic rules, but has also other kind of constraints. We are going to discuss them in the next meetings. And there is this idea of what is interpretation and what is meaning, because sometimes we think, you know, it's the same thing, but the interpretation is something that in translation is also like a technique. And somebody was asking me, I think we were talking about the need to train our students to be interpreters. What does it mean? They know what they are doing, but interpreting in translation studies is also like a very specific technique of translating, and generally it is something that has nothing to do with the written text, it has to do with oral text. So somebody was mentioning also the notion of equivalence, that we have to find equivalence. This notion of equivalence in translation is a big problem, because for many years there was this notion that the translator should only, you know, create this linguistic equivalence. But what if we think of the level of meaning, of culture, of, you know, the receivers, the publishers? I mean, what kind of result, you know, can we create? Is it real that we have to do the same thing? And if it's can we ever reach the same thing? Or if we do the same thing from a linguistic point of view, Have we really done a good translation? Because sometimes, like I think it's Navinji, somebody was mentioning the idea of no, maybe it was anyway, somebody mentioned the notion of translating word by word an idiom. That of course it is the same thing, but it doesn't make sense. It's not the same thing in the receiving language. So now, of course, as I said, there is this idea that we have to divide what we do when we translate and when we interpret. So interpreting is really like a different kind of craft, of profession. To be an interpreter, you have to be trained in a different way. And of course, when I use these words, what do I mean? For example, here I put some examples. I studied translation at the university. Okay, they published the Hindi translation of the report. So we are distinguishing. The first thing is we are talking about a subject, a discipline of studies, and the other is the product that we created. And then, we also have the process of translation. Like if we have a translation service, this is the process of translation. If we talk about interpreting is something that gives a translation, but it's not something that you can think about, like when you translate a literary text and you can revise it. This is either simultaneously or just immediately, consecutive. So, and it's something oral, so you cannot really revise it, because you have to do it very quickly. And so we are very often talking about all these things as translation, but as you see, there are many, many different abilities, skills, training that we should have that enter into this. And I put this because it's very clear, but I'm not going to read it for you, but I'll give you, it's like, because you can see the different thing that you can see when you talk about translation, which is, of course, interpreting is a form of translation. But it is specifical. And so there is this time pressure that, of course, if you are translating in certain environments like publishers for like informative texts, then you might have time pressure also for that. But also, like, for example, I translated a very big, thick novel, and I had time pressure, but it was not like in 2 hours, it was like for months. So you see the difference. And can we consider this a translation, which is like a dictionary entry? Because one of the meanings of the word translation, especially we will come back to this tomorrow, if we think of anuvad, it's anuvad, what is this? It's like explaining, thinking after something, talking after something and giving an explanation of that. So is this a translation? I give you the entry, the dictionary entry of something. So is this a translation of the word translation? I know I'm trying to challenge you, just, to make you think of why is translation such a complex field when we want to define it, when we want to study it. And is this a translation? When you have a sonnet and you have a paraphrase of that, can we consider it a translation? Because somehow there is a difference, The first one is the sonnet, Shakespeare's sonnet, so it's like, बहुत पवित्र होता है, Shakespeare है तो, and the second one is just a paraphrase, so it's not meant to be poetry. So what happens when you put something that is poetry into prose? Is it a translation? Is it something else? If it's not a translation, what is it? But if a translation is something that explains something that has been said before, so what do we do with this? We should accept it as a translation. or not? It's up to you. I'm not, I don't have an answer, I mean. So, when we go to Wikipedia and we Google Godin, and there is this summary of Godin. I just took the first passage, you know, and it's like blah, 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 blah. I don't know why rupees is in red. I have to take it out, probably because it was highlighted in the original Wikipedia page. So, but is this a translation of Godin? Because a summary in certain cultures can be considered a translation. In Europe, most people will say no, but elsewhere, there are examples that say, okay, this is like a summary, it's a commentary, it's something like that, but it is a form of translation. And what about the other media, you know? If I take the cinematic transposition of Harry Potter, is that a translation? And if it's dubbed from English into Hindi, is it a translation or not? Subtitling. These are different kinds of course, if you think of, you know, using one language, putting it into another language, it's the same thing. But is it the same thing when you are required to subtitle something? Because your translation, when you do subtitling, has to be very short. Sometimes it cannot be literal, because the frame, you know, the time you have, I mean, your words have to be within the frame, so you cannot really put everything into that. So what kind of choices do you have? Are these the same choices that you have to do when you translate from Italian to Hindi or Hindi into Italian? Like if you translate Godin, you have totally different problems, totally different things, even if you are still doing something that is translation. And what about the sign language? Because this is something that, for example, in Europe is really very much debated today. Is sign language a form of translation or not? Because is it a language? Is it even a language? Because some people think that this is not a language. So, because the problem is also what is a language, but we are not going to address this, because otherwise we are not getting out of this alive. So again, if we try to give a definition, we can find another definition on another very important book on translation studies that I recommend, because it's really very clear. And of course, I mean, this is the most common definition, you know, that you translate from a source text to a target text. And this may be written or oral, and so you're passing from the source language to the target language. This is the basic definition of translation. But if you think of all the different aspects that I have tried to highlight, maybe this definition is not enough, but it's very important because it's the starting point. It starts from the big father of the definition of translation, which is Roman Jakobson, who identified 3 categories of translation. And of course, we are going to see how these 3 categories are useful, but maybe some people challenge them. What are these 3 categories? Is the intralingual translation, which is like rewording. It's like an interpretation of verbal signs by means of other signs of the same language. So maybe if we think of subtitling, of, I don't know, like a paraphrase, doing a summary, this kind of intralingual translation, if we accept this. The second one is the interlingual translation, which is what Jakobson calls translation proper. So for him, this is the only real authentic form of translation. And what is it? it's an interpretation of verbal signs by means of some other language, which is the typical idea that you take some verbal signs and you transfer them into another language. I say pane and you understand roti. I say bread and you understand roti. Or the problem is, of course, I mean, if we only think this is the real translation, what are we taking off? What are we erasing? All the work that is behind, all the idea. I mean, for pane in Italian is not brot, because brot, the dark bread loaf that is typical, for example, in Germany, I mean, is not the typical Italian bread. So if I think of bread, I think of my idea of bread. The image that I have is my idea of bread. And if I think of making bread, what does it mean making bread? For me, it's like, kneading, but making like a roti is something different. And you can see also the way the Arab bread is made is very similar to the roti, because it's made, it's not done on the table, it's done in a vessel. And so it's really, as I said, a different technique. So if we think that this interlingual translation is the translation proper, we are sort of giving less importance to all these things that I will show you in the next days. I hope I will be able to show you. They are important though. And if we just efface them, if we erase them, if we don't think about them, maybe, I don't know. We are doing the proper translation, so we are very good. But I don't know if this kind of translation is the best translation. I mean, many discussions have been done about that. So, okay, let me just talk about the third one is the intersemiotic translation, that is transmutation, rupantar, transmutation. You change the form. So it's an interpretation of verbal signs by means of signs of non-verbal systems. Like I write a novel and then a film is made about that. I write something like the text of a play for theater, the drama, and then in the theater they perform it. So this is a sort of translation, and of course, as you can see, there are non-verbal sign systems that enter into the field. So these are all issues that are related to the definition of translation. Any question?
Two examples that you took of media, like translation of Shakespeare's sonnet into a simpler language, and that of Harry Potter into a visual medium. So regarding that, first of all, an example was given by Sir as well about Ramayana and Ramcharitmanas as well. So again, I take example of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. So there is Chaucer's Canterbury Tales in Middle English, and there is a translation that is taught to undergrads in simpler English. But the simpler English text has also sort of become a text in itself, to the point that it's no longer translation. That he spoke about Ramcharitmanas, that do we call it a translation now, or has it become a text in itself? So this question of textuality is that arises.
This is a very good point. I mean, what is the original and what is is the translation an original text?
No.
So it depends, For many years, we're going to talk about. I'm going now to go through the development of the translation studies, and you will see that this is one of the points. For many years, the translator and translation did not have any prestige, any recognition. It was like a derivative text. But we know from history that some translations maybe had, I don't know, a better life than the original one, or, their own independent life. So I don't think there is only one, I don't know, Sorry, I am stuck into, just a minute, something happened. Okay, no problem. And I don't think there is one reply for all. I think I will come back to this point. We always have to think of the location and of the historical time.
And the second one with regards to the Harry Potter slide. So I take example of how Harry Potter, two instances of translation in Harry Potter in Hindi. So the Dementors that arrive in, I think, Prison of Azkaban are dubbed as Dam Peshach in Hindi. And Dementors, I would presume, is from a Latin root, and Dam Peshach is from a Sanskritic, Prakritic, Hindi root. And then there is this spell, very popular spell, Expecto Patronum, which is dubbed as Pitra Dev Sangrakshana. So again, do they come from? They come from different roots, signify different meanings. So is this actually translation, or are we just finding convenient terms to replace?
This is related to the notion of domestication or foreignization.
When you translate, you always have to choose if you want to take the text close to the target culture. Let's say here is where the culture comes into play, or if you want to do the opposite thing. We are going to discuss this, yeah, because there has been, like Venuti, many people have discussed this. Of course, here again, I think, the choice to, in this case, domesticate the names. Generally, you don't translate proper names. But in Italy, we have an historical example when Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, and now we are living in a fascist time, so maybe very, very soon it will happen again. I hope not, but they didn't want, they wanted all the names of Italian places be in Italian. But there are many places in Italy where the name of my village where I live is Chalancing. And if the French teacher is somewhere, yes, I live in a part of Italy where the local dialect, the patois, is a form of French language. So at that time, there was the government rule that everything had to be Italianized. And so you had all the names like Erasmus von Rotterdam, he became Erasmo da Rotterdam. Because everything had to be Italianized. But here, I think, so in this case, I don't know, we can discuss if it's right or wrong. In this case, I think it was a choice that made, because these names tell a lot about the character, so the translator probably wanted the people, possibly children, I don't know, to be closer to this. So I think that generally we think that domestication is a bad thing, but sometimes I don't think there is something that is bad forever. It depends on what you are translating, for whom, in which sector of the publishing market, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, it happened the same in Italian, the Italian translator was so good that they created some names that I think some of them are even better than the original ones because they are funny, so and the children loved it, and like my daughter was very small when she was reading Harry Potter, and when she read the English version, she was very disappointed, like, oh, this name is not the right name. But of course it's the original. But anyway, okay. So, I don't know if there is another quick question. Otherwise, I will just go on because... No? Okay. So, we now touch the second part of my class, which is shaping translation studies. So how did this happen? And if any of you have already learned it, I apologize for repeating it, but for those who don't know about this, maybe I thought it's good to give a very quick overview of this discipline. So, after the Second World War, there was a need doing translation with scientific criteria. You know, the need of a scientific approach to translation, because translation studies is something very new. But translation has always been done. Somebody was mentioning Saint Jacob, you know, who translated from the Bible from Greek into Latin. He was the first important translator, but I mean, so, and I don't think he ever studied any translation studies. I mean, he didn't have any training in translation, he just did it. And also, I don't know, well, Tulsidas, if he did a translation of Valmiki's Ramayana, I mean, he didn't have any formal training in that, you know, or even, you know, any kind. It's always been done everywhere. But this kind of being an academic discipline, the fact that we are here in a university, you are enrolled in the university, I am supposed to be an academician, and, you know, it's, oh my God, this is a serious thing, you know? So when did this happen? It happened after the Second World War, so it's not too old. And we can see that, I mean, in this process of, you know, creating this discipline, there were many names, and three of them are the most important. These are the sections that I'm going to examine, and many theoretical approaches. So we start with translation studies or translation science, and then it becomes theory of translation. Sorry, translation studies is what we are using now. But we also find theory of translation, translatology, or I don't know, traductologie. It comes from the French. So what is this? What is this? It is a branch of human sciences. So it's like a discipline that is studied in humanities, and it studies theoretical, descriptive, and applied aspects of translations and or interpretation, even if what we are going to do now is not specifically referring to interpretation. I'm mostly talking about translation at large. So, and as I said, we can have a prescriptive or a normative, descriptive approach, and of course, it is an interdisciplinary field, because it's not only related to linguistics, but as I have tried to suggest, you know, if we want to take the whole frame of what we are talking about, we have also to talk about, okay, philology, of course, linguistics, but also literature, comparative literature, semiotics, and we will see sometimes also psychology and cultural studies and so on and so forth. So here is the definition that we find in one of the founding books about translation studies, which is Steiner's After Babel. And he writes, we do not know with any great precision or confidence what it is that we are asking. The question is, what is translation studies? And concomitantly, what meaningful answers would really be like. So he's writing a book about translation studies, but it's like, okay, we really don't know exactly what we are talking about, which means we are creating this field. We are shaping this discipline. And I have decided to give you a three-step evolution of translation studies, which is based on 3 generations, so it's chronologically ordered, but it's also based on the fact that these 3 generations chose to discuss, to point out the importance for the first generation of the word, so the linguistic approach. For the second generation, it was the text. And so we can see what kind of text, literary text, any kind of text, well, it depends. And for the third generation, it is culture. So you can see that with the passing of time, the people who were studying, who were shaping this discipline, they were addressing these different things, trends, common points. So even if we agree that we don't know what we are talking about, but at least we can identify some trends. It could have been done differently because, I mean, it's a choice that I made, you know, to present it through these three generations, because we can see also that another criterion could be to look at the textual genre that was important for the scholars. For the first generation, it was non-literary text. So, like, you know, information booklets, something like that. For the second generation, it was more literary text. And for the third generation, it was like going beyond the binary between literary and non-literary text. Anything, all kind of text was to be taken into consideration. But I decided to go through this. So, word, text, and culture, okay? So, the first generation spoke about translation science. The second generation spoke about translation theory. And the third generation coined the name that we are using today, which is translation studies. So you can see that it is like a process, you know, and I'm just briefly trying to highlight this. Okay, first, this science of translation, it came out in the 1950s, 1960s, as I told you, after the Second World War. And it was linked to the emergence of the automatic translation by computer. Now everybody goes to ChatGPT. Or now there is the Chinese one that is, I don't know more. But anyway, I mean, so anybody now thinks, okay, automatic translation. But at that time, it was really something, oh my God, a computer can translate things. You know, it had never happened before. It was really something like changing things. And actually, who was studying these things? It was computer science theorists, mathematicians, engineers. So as you can see, the first generation had the idea that we can study translation in order to describe it, formalize it logically, like you do with computer programming. This is a list of the scholars. I'm not going to talk about them all. You will have this slide and you can go and Google them, and I'll give you also some reference list, so I mean you can, but of course, as you can see, they were people coming from Russia, France, German, America, and so I mean it's a kind, like it's linked also to the Eugene Nida's theory of translation that is connected to the translation of the Bible. So it's really like very charged with this idea of connecting a special text. So this kind of translation has special needs, you know, because you are translating something that may be very dangerous. So what is this translation science? It's this idea of creating this scientification, scientificization, I don't know how to say it, of language and linguistic. So the linguistic act has to be scientific, but very soon this kind of approach was left behind because scholars in linguistics got tired of it. And the important thing is Chomsky's theories that were like, you know, addressing the notion of universal grammar, you know, the universality of language, of grammatical construction, of deep structures. And this is something that has been for a certain time very important. But very soon this became a problem because, as I told you, this whole approach was based on the notion of equivalence, which is like, how do we, like I was saying, if I translate the Bible and I think that the target text has to be equivalent to the source text, where do we find this equivalence? And is it possible to have an equivalence NIDA introduces the idea of dynamic equivalence, which is like instead of having the word by word, trying to find the same effect in the target language as you have in the source text. But of course, this is very problematic. And what was created was a series of highly formalized theories that were like, giving the translator a lot of rules. So it's like you have like a manual and you have to follow all the rules. It's a very normative orientation, which if you ever translated anything, I don't know if you would like to do it like that somebody tells you what exactly you have to do. Especially in some kind of text, like literary text. This is something that not everybody likes. So the critique on this approach is that, of course, language is important, but it's not what translation is. Translation is not a branch of linguistics. So you can give us all the rules you want, but this is not what we are doing. This kind of approach did not give much importance to the translator. The translator didn't have any role, it was just like, a machine. So you see, it's not, and generally everything that comes from this kind of theories is source oriented. So the most important thing is the source text. And the final text is not so important. So you have all these a prioristic theories, but they are not very useful when you are really doing translation. I mean, when you are there and you have dirty hands, and you have flour everywhere, and you are making the bread, and it's like, okay, I don't need this. I'm doing something different. So here comes the second generation. The second generation, which is like at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. And here enter literature, comparative literature. So scholars of literature and comparative literature were really disappointed with this idea of translation. They come in and they say, okay, look, the idea is that translation doesn't have to be normative, doesn't have to be prescriptive. We want to create a discipline that is not source-oriented, that is not so rigid. We want to privilege the literary texts that were really excluded in the first generation's discussions. And why that? This is very interesting because it's not like literary texts are discovered into translation studies, because if you think of what happened before the very notion of translation science or whatever, most of the translations were done on literary texts. So it's like the literary text strikes back, So, and here in the second generation, we have these texts that are considered important, and what they are asking is, what is that makes translation a translation? So what is the ingredients that we have, okay? And this is why contrastive analysis was marginalized, and in some places, like in Germany, a lot of scholars went on, studying this linguistic-oriented translation, but there is more interest on the types of texts and the textual purpose. And functionalism, the fact that language is a communicative act that happens in a socio-cultural context. So when you translate, you don't have only a written text. You have all these things that enter into. And this was the discussion. What happened? Oh. मेरी सुरक्षा बस होगी, कोई बात नहीं. So, and this is when the name changed. And in France, they created the name traductologie. which is translated into English as translatology. It's very difficult for me. So it's about a theory of translation. So it's not a science, it's a theory, because translation is an experience that the translator, or the people who are interested in it, have to recapture within one's own reflection. And it's interesting because we pass from the level of word to word, we arrive to a wider level. It's sentence to sentence, passage to passage, and the relation is no longer a interlinguistic relation, but it becomes an intertextual relation. This is very crucial and it's very important. So where does this happen? It happens in Holland, in France, and at the end of the 70s, we have also the school that refers to the Russian formalism. And very important at this point is the school of Tel Aviv, because there are Gideon Turi and Itamareddin Zohar that are really important because they created the notion of literary polysystem. And I'm not going to explain this now, but if you want, we can come back to this maybe some other time, because now I want to give you the full, we're going to discuss this in somehow. So this means that in the meantime, also the very idea of what is translation for changes, because for many years, translation was only used as a learning tool for language courses. But if you think of all these, discussions, theoretical discussions, of course, the grammar translation method, which is something that unfortunately, I say unfortunately because in Italy it's still very widespread, but I think it's really very bad because you learn the grammar rules and this is supposedly the tools you have to learn a language. And it's like when I came to India the first time, I could not speak a word of Hindi, but I knew all the grammar rules. So I don't know if this is really language learning. So, but this is the system that was used for languages like Greek and Latin, and so this is what was supposed to be. So you memorize a lot of rules, and you create sentences like "the cat is on the table." I don't know, it's something, and or sentences like I don't know. I wrote an article about in Italian grammar, Hindi grammar, that was written by my guru. She's very good, but of course, she is a devotee. She's a bhakta of this grammar translation method. But the examples that she gives in that grammar, don't help you to survive if you go on the road and you have to, hire a rickshaw, order some dish in a restaurant. You will die. You will just die. You cannot survive. So then, as I said, there is this contrastive linguistics that is this field that developed in order to compare languages, identify the linguistic differences, and of course create database so that you could proceed with this translation. In that time, at the end of the 60s, we also have the development of these literary workshops. This is something that happened mostly in the USA, where people would just get together and debate about how do we translate and so on and so forth. This was done, for example, I know of an experiment like this regarding Hindi literature that was done in the 90s, and Harish Trivedi wrote about that because there was this American poet coming here without knowing anything about India, anything about Hindi, and he was in this workshop. But there were all the translators and poets and so on, and so they were debating and so on and so forth. And apparently this is a very good method because you discuss a lot, so finally everybody has to agree with the final version. So this is another method. But also because when the grammatical approach, the normative approach was criticized, the communicative approach came up because people started saying, okay, you have to use language in authentic situations. So it's not like the cat is on the table. Okay, how many cats have you ever seen in how many tables in your life? Maybe many, but I mean, it's not what you want to know when you learn English. You know, maybe you need other kind of expressions. And so this method privileges spoken language, and so it's totally different. And it's based on the target language. So it's like you have to forget the source language, you have only to focus on the target language. So you see how many different views we have. There is also the Berlitz method that is one of these communicative methods that actually it's much older than this time, but it was like limited. And the Berlitz method is the one that says you learn a language without translating. So you don't translate, you don't explain things, you repeat, you use, and so on. So, but this is how translation is related to language teaching and learning, because there is also this problem, you know, is translation something that has to do with language learning and language teaching? Well, we know. Even if you say, no, we are not translating, but somehow there is a level where you are translating in some part of your brain, you know, there is this sort of interlanguage or something like that. And finally, at the end of the 80s, we have James Holmes that creates the name that we are using today. So he is the first one who says, he writes an essay that is called The Name and the Nature of Translation Studies. So it's the foundation of a new field of studies, even if we know it's nothing new, it's like, you know, something that comes out of all this process. And he proposes a general framework distinguishing between two areas of research, which is the pure and the applied translation. I'm going to show you this grid, you know, the map, which is made by Gideon Turi, one of the scholars of the Tel Aviv schools, who, as you see, he made, where is this? It's this one. Okay. He made this like binary, pure and applied. But as you can see, the pure part is much more developed than the applied one. What does this mean to you? If I say that applied translation is so small, there is so many, I mean, not many things to say. In the pure part, we have a lot of things to say. What does it mean? Is it by chance? Possibly it's because applied translation is less developed or less important, is less something than the other one. So in this approach to translation, we can see that the theoretical part is somehow more important, because you see the general theories are then composed by partial theories, and any partial theory is delimited by medium, area, grade, text type, time period, problem, and so on. And I'm going back, you see, so this is, but this, okay, you have translation training, translation aids, translation criticism. It's not very detailed. You see the difference between this detailed map and this, which is very general somehow, which means that somehow applied translation, what is applied translation? Is what I do, is the craft. You know, it's less important than the theorizing. And this for some time has been there, because it means that the focus is not on the translator, but it is on the translation in many different things. So this is very important, but of course, this will be discussed. And of course, this is very important because this descriptive theory, it has limits, but it makes us think about the product, the function, and the process of translation. So the analysis of what we translate, and this can be done diachronic or synchronic, which means through time or in the same time, and the context, what is the influence of the translation? As you said, some translations are more influential than the original text. So this was not considered before. Now it comes up. And some people ask, okay, we have to study also this, not only, okay, if we think it's a derivative text, so this is not important. But if we think that translation is important, so the function it has, it is important. For example, how many copies we sell, who reads this translation, what is it for, is it used for education? I don't know. Does it become a literary model? Something like that. And the process, so what goes on in the translator's mind. So if we think of what goes on in the translator's mind, we are introducing psychology, but we are also giving more importance to the translator. So you see there is a shift. And of course, as I said, many of these subdivisions are artificial, but it is important because these subdivisions allow us to consider the division of labor that comes into translation. Who is doing what? For example, if it's like a commission translation, I don't know, your boss asks you to do it, or the Sahitya Academy asks you to do it, or I don't know, somebody asks you to do this, and then you do the publisher wants you to do it, and so on and so forth. So when does this happen? As I said, around the 80s, and from there we can see that translation studies is like graduates into a serious discipline, because there is a proliferation of research, but there is also the institutionalization of the discipline, which means that universities that had never taken translation into consideration start opening translation courses, teaching of translation, a degree in translation. You see the difference, when translation is not there, is not taught as a discipline, it means that it does not exist in the academic world. So the fact that in the 80s, this starts, and so we have, for example, in Leuven, there is the CIRA chair for translation. It's the first one in Europe. It's like an official chair for teaching translation. And I remember at that time, people were saying, oh, this is just a fashion. These people don't know what they are doing. It's not serious, It's not serious research. They're just like making up things. Because the real thing is philology, maybe literature, it's not translation. What is translation? And we have major publishers who start like series of books about translation. So you see, starting from the 80s, in the 90s, translation studies become something real and visible. So this is something that, as you see, is not so old. What is the idea that is behind the notion of translation studies? It is not a science, so it means that there are many theories. It doesn't mean that there are no good theories, because, if you don't have a theory, you don't have a scientific approach. But they say there is no generally acknowledged criteria that we can demonstrate, that can demonstrate that a theory is wrong. We can say, oh, this theory is okay, but we are not happy with that. But we cannot prove it false. So this is why it's not a science. If it's a science, you can prove the opponent's false. And this is not what we can do. It's not even like translation theory, because a theory must have something like uniform and univocal, and as I said, we are really talking about everything and the opposite of everything. It's really multifaceted, and there are different approaches. For sure, it is interdisciplinary. And that's why, you see, I can speak of translation and I'm teaching Hindi, but some people who teach other languages, but also maybe are in comparative literature, we can all discuss translation because it is interdisciplinary. I'm almost done. And, you know, there is no practical goal that we have to reach. There is no idea of creating models. We are, like, you know, investigating the relations between theory and practice. We are interested both in the theory and in the craft. So we are asking translators, what do you do? What do you need? We are not telling translators, you should do this and this and that. And if they say something, we are thinking about that and we try to integrate it into our theory. And as Anthony Pym said, the practice, I mean, who is a translator? You know, the translators, they already know how to solve their problems because they always do every day. We don't have to give answers to their problems. But we have to investigate the different practices and find something that is useful for, you know, the discussion. And, you know, we are moving towards more and we are giving more and more attention to translators as people, not translators as, you know, like some abstract ideas or something like that. Okay, so what? So who is doing this? Many people. We can see that, for example, in the UK, there was Susan Besnet who did it, and she was like very, very active. And then we have many different approaches. For example, feminist scholars take into bring attention to the problem of gender and translation. And then in Brazil, there is the whole idea of the cannibal school, which is like what we could also call like the post-colonial idea, you know, of how subaltern literatures relate to hegemonic literature, you know, something like that. So even in translation, subaltern languages and hegemonic languages, the post-colonial theory of translation. And this is something, I mean, we are going to just, you know, hit all these problems in the next meetings. And there is the cultural turn. The cultural turn is when, you know, the constructionist school that was established by, well, it was like not created, but I mean, comes from the idea of Derrida, and the man who discussed the notion of text, of language, and nation. And then all this brings into act also the whole problem of power, because we are also going to discuss this. And of course, there is this multi-ethnic perspective, the post-colonial, which is post-structural, all the post-modern also approach. And, you know, all these issues are coming into translation. So as you see, it's not like language to language. It's a very wide area of study. So now, in the 21st century, what we have, it's like this notion of, you know, interdisciplinarity, which means that we are ready to import models from different disciplines. And for example, I will also talk about how it is important for translators to be in contact with other fields of study like ethnography or anthropology, because this is another field where there is a lot of translation going on, but nobody thinks about that. You know, it's like it's nowhere to be seen. But I will talk about how important it is, because there are a lot of ethical issues that come into play. There is specialization because, of course, we are, as I said, we have identified that there are specialized fields like interpreting and so on. There is the notion of globalization, what happens to translation in a globalized world. And so the relationship between translation and sociology. This is all what translation studies are today. And we are going to discuss. And of course, there is also the, let's say, the problem of relating to new technologies. I am not going into this field because it's a very wide area of discussion, and I didn't have the time to bring also this. But as I told you, I mean, the whole idea of artificial intelligence and, you know, automatic translation is really crucial for us. So to conclude, I want you to be aware of some websites where you can find bibliographies on translation studies, because I will probably put some references, maybe of the books that I'm mentioning, if I'm quoting something, so I'm trying to do it. But in India, you have the National Translation Mission that has this page where you can have a lot of references, and so you can start with this. You will have the power. Maybe you can send the PDF. We can make a PDF of this PowerPoint so they can have it. Okay, and so you don't have to. I mean, I know it's very small, but this is another very important website. It's called the Translation Studies Bibliography. I like it very much, but this is my anti-capitalist aspect. You have to subscribe, so it's not free, and so well, you can decide if you want to pay for that or not. So, but anyway, it's very good because Yves Gambier is really one of the, like, you know, old scholars of translation studies. He had it. I mean, he's in charge of this work. It's very, very good. So. But maybe your university can subscribe to it. I mean, you know, if you have like an institution that subscribes to it, then you as a student can do it. But even here, you know, I don't know if the university should invest the scarce money that is given to us to pay this capital. So anyway, okay, sorry, I'm very bad. Then there is this one. It's a bibliography of interpreting and translation. And as far as I know, this is for free, but I mean, it's yeah, it's a database made by the University of Alicante. So I think it's good. And this one is made by a professor who created this very basic thing. This is like an Excel file. You can click on it and you get a huge Excel file that you can use as you want, but it's full of references and it's for free. So I think, and it's very good. I mean, if you want just to have like a general list of books regarding translation studies, apart from the ones that I put, you know, I put the cover, so maybe you can find them in a library. But I think these are at least 4 websites where you can find a lot of references. And maybe you know more of them, I don't know, you can suggest more, but I mean, we are not here to be exhaustive, so.
Just one that has come up recently, Ashawad.in, that is conceptualized by Ashoka Center for Translation.
Okay, but you know, I don't know about Indian. If you send it to me, I will be very grateful, because, okay, one disclaimer I have to do, I never teach translation studies, you know, this is the problem. So it's only my experience. I'm sharing my experience, you know, something that I learned, that I studied, and I teach some translation when I translate with my students, but I never teach a full course on translation studies. So that's why, you know, I'm not so, I mean, okay, so if you can share it, maybe, yeah, good. So yeah, This is just, what, and so this is that. It's almost 6 o'clock. I hope you did not get bored by this long talk. But if you have any question, I'm here. I think everybody wants to go home. They're exhausted. Yeah.
Somebody asked, Komal Thakur, online, we talked about sign language as it is the only language for some people. So can we call it an inter-Semitic translation?
Yes, okay, this is debated because some people think that sign language is a full-fledged language. Some people think that the language itself is a inter-semiotic translation because you are not talking, you're not using verbal, you're using signs. And of course, it's a debate, and I'm not really very an expert in that. But one of my students did a research on sign language in India, and she found out that actually there are many sign languages in India. There is not only one. And so, yes, in a way, because you are translating into signs something, but you're codifying, you're creating a code with these signs. So it is a translation, but it is also a language because, it has its own rules. And there is no universal agreement on what it is. That's why I asked you. I mean, is it translation or is it because? If it's a language, then that is a very special kind of language because it has no verbal. It has some verbal, but not full-fledged.
Translation is in itself semiotic work. So, sign language can be.
Why you say it's muted? Why you say that translation is muted?
Translation is?
What did you say? Sorry, I didn't.
Translation is inter-semiotic.
Oh, inter-semiotic. Oh, okay, sorry.
Bhasa language is in itself semiotic.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. But that's why I put it there. But I know that some people don't agree. So.
One more question. How does the concept of equivalence play a role in translation theory and practices?
In translation?
Theory and practice. Theory and practices.
Union practices. Oh, well, equivalence, equivalence is a notion that has been considered very important for a lot of time, but that has been criticized in the third wave, as I said, in the third generation. Equivalence, was considered the basis for translation. Sorry? Acha. Shut up! So, of course, it was a very important notion for a long time, and even nowadays, there is an idea that you have to write something that is equivalent to the source text. But I like to quote Umberto Eco, because, I will give you a lot of examples from Italian scholars, because, I'm from Italy, so. And Umberto Eco, he's a very important Italian philosopher and linguist and semiologist. He was a scholar of semiotics, so. And he wrote a book that was, I don't know the English translation, but in Italian it was almost the same thing. What is translation? It is almost the same thing. So he said, of course you're trying to get to the same thing, but you cannot have real equivalence. So there are people who give a lot of importance to equivalence. There are other scholars who think that the role of the translation is to disturb the reader. But we will discuss it when we will talk about, for example, Venuti and his ideas of translation. Because for some people, and sometimes I do it myself, I don't want the text to be very smooth. And so what is the equivalence? Is it like the fact that the reader has no problem, is like, you know, drinking a cup of water and it's like that? Or is it something where the reader from time to time like stumbles and says, oh, what is this? If I do this, this is not in the original, so apparently it's not the equivalence. But if I do this, and in this way, I take the reader's attention to some cultural ideas, to some problems or something like that. So I am doing something on purpose. And so what do you mean by equivalence, you know? Is it like the word by word? If we think of equivalence like that, then even neither would not agree. But I think now the notion of equivalence is really something very discussed, because especially if you emphasize the role of the translator, then the equivalence is something that should efface the work of the translator. But I have been telling you that in the third generation, this is something that has become more and more important. So the translator has to be visible. So that kind of equivalence is not what we want. Then, of course, there is not one, I mean, there's not the right solution. I mean, for some translations, it's okay to have a word-by-word equivalence, but for some other texts, it's not. There is an English writer who lived, Tim Parks. He is English. He lives in Italy. Maybe now he moved, but he lived in Italy for a long time. And he writes in English. But he wrote something beautiful about, you know, being a foreigner living in Italy. And he speaks about the kind of language that he uses with his sons. And like, you know, the fact that they would translate word by word some Italian idioms, and it was like their own private language. It's so funny. I mean, for me, reading that, it was like, oh my God, it's really funny. But I mean, this is equivalence, but of course it doesn't work. It works if you want to be, I don't know, like make a joke or something like that, but otherwise it doesn't work.
There's also this Indian origin also, called Jhumpa Lahiri.
Oh yes, I will talk about Jhumpa Lahiri.
Similarly.
Okay, stay tuned. We will talk about Jhumpa Lahiri.
नहीं, कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं है। मैं एक क्वेश्चन कर लेता हूँ जो यहाँ से दिखता है। सॉरी, the lifestyle you ordered is currently out of stock.
I'm sorry about that, but we live in this kind of world. I am very sorry. I didn't order this world. They delivered a different thing. Well, I'm not going into politics, but it's here. Wait. Maybe you should also put this. ये भी लगाना है?
लगाना है तो लगा दो। लगाओ यार। बुढ़ापे में ये सब होता है। आचार्य रामचंद्र शुक्ल ने अपने हिंदी साहित्य के इतिहास की भूमिका में लिखा है कि धन्यवाद देना आधुनिक युग की बदमाशी है। अब ये बदमाशी अनुवाद अध्ययन पढ़ते हुए आप सब 10वें दिन तक में ठीक से इसका ट्रांसलेशन करना समझ लेंगे कि इस एक वाक्य में आचार्य रामचंद्र शुक्ल ने कहा क्या। मैं जब दिल्ली आया था तो पहली बार कहीं जाता था, किसी से पूछा कि भाई उस जगह किधर से जाएंगे, उसने कह दिया और मैं चल पड़ा उधर। तो दुकानदार ने आवाज दे के कहा कि ओ भाई थैंक यू तो बोल के जा। मैंने लौट के उसकी तरफ देखा और कहा कि मेरी आंखों में देखिए, शब्द की जरूरत आपको नहीं पड़ेगी। आप सब ने इतनी देर से इस बात प्रोफेसर अलेसांद्रा जी का भाषण सुना। इससे पीछे के सत्र में भी आप सब गंभीरता से सुन रहे थे। तो सबसे पहले तो आप सब की तरफ से, भारतीय भाषा केंद्र की तरफ से, पूरे जेएनयू परिवार की तरफ से और ऑनलाइन जुड़े हुए सभी मित्रों की ओर से, और इससे आगे भी कहना हो तो ये तो रिकॉर्ड हो रहा है और शायद फेसबुक लाइव भी है, तो यह देर तक ये बातें रह जाएंगी और ज्ञान परंपरा के विकास में संभव है कि यह अगली पीढ़ी के लिए भी यह एक संपत्ति होगी। आज अलेसांद्रा जी का इतना महत्वपूर्ण भाषण, अनुवाद अध्ययन के जो भी छात्र छात्राएं हैं उन्हें इनमें से कुछ बातें लग रही होगी कि हमारी कक्षा में इन सब चीज़ों पर पहले भी चर्चा हुई है, मगर जिस बेहतरीन ढंग से शुरू में अलेसांद्रा जी ने बेकरी का, उसके पूरी पद्धति का वीडियो दिखाकर और बाद में उसकी व्याख्या की है, उस व्याख्या के आलोक में शायद आप सारे लोग उन बातों को, अनुवाद अध्ययन के अध्येता भी जो तब ठीक से नहीं समझ सके होंगे, उनके दिमाग में आज अलेसांद्रा जी के इस भाषण से और उस बेकरी के उदाहरण से आप सबके दिमाग में ये बातें एक ज्ञान की रश्मियों की तरह जागृत हुई होंगी। तो इन सभी चीज़ों के लिए तो शब्द कम पड़ते हैं। इतने लोगों की तरफ से, इतने बड़े समाज की तरफ से, ज्ञान परंपरा की एक श्रृंखला की ओर से अलेसांद्रा जी का धन्यवाद करूं तो शब्द तो सामान्यतया हिंदी में मिल नहीं रहा है। अब जब मिल नहीं रहा है, ऐसे ऐसे काम सदियों में होते हैं जो आज हुआ है। मैं अपने इन सभी समाज जिनका नाम लिया उनकी ओर से प्रोफेसर अलेसांद्रा जी आपका बहुत कृतज्ञ हूँ कि आपने इस भाषण से हमारे द्वारा आमंत्रित अध्येताओं को लाभान्वित कराया। और कार्यक्रम तो होता है तभी जब श्रोता बैठे रहते हैं, और आप सब ने सांस रोक कर एक राजेंद्र सिंह बेदी की एक कहानी पढ़ी थी। उसमें एक वाक्य था कि बुढ़िया अपनी सर्वेंद्रिय से वह कथा सुन रही थी। आप सोच सकते हैं राजेंद्र सिंह बेदी कितने बड़े कहानीकार थे और उन्होंने इस पंक्ति में एकाग्रता को कितना ऊंचा स्थान दिया। आप सब ने उसी तरह अपनी सर्वेंद्रिय से, पांचों इंद्रियां लगाकर जो ये भाषण सुना, जाहिर है कि सब ने अपने को संपन्न करने के लिए सुना। तो आप सबका बहुत बहुत आभार अनुवाद अध्ययन परिवार की ओर से। उस परिवार में जाहिर है कि हम दो हैं पर हम दोनों के अनेक हैं। तो वे सब ये हमारा पूरा परिवार है। तो हम इन सब के इस आयोजन को आप सब ने सफल किया है। और अंत में कुछ लोग किसी कार्यक्रम को आकर महत्वपूर्ण बनाते हैं। आप लोगों ने आकर महत्वपूर्ण बनाया, पर ये ध्यान रखिए कि कुछ लोग नहीं आकर भी महत्वपूर्ण बनाते हैं। जो नहीं आए उनका भी आभार, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। कल इसी जगह 2 बजे हम फिर मिलेंगे। आज के लिए बर सुखसार पावल तुअ थीरे, यह विद्यापति की पंक्ति है। आप सबके साथ अच्छा लगा, आभार, धन्यवाद। ये लोग कर लेंगे। ये सब कर लेंगे ये लोग। ये आपका है, आपका ये है, या ये तार भी है?
तार